was another typical, moody day in the office. I was out of coin for the day's paper, so I was catching up on the last few weeks' issues, several of which featured yours truly. They call me Snooty, W.J. Snooty, and for a while Snooty had been living up to the name. After a successful case nabbing Frank Schwirtzy, my former hired coat hanger, for Grand Theft Snickers, people began to flock to my office. Call after call after call, all simpler than the previous call to solve. Talk about a confidence booster. Between the cat burglar stealing actual cats and leaving a trail of litter, the missing persons call that turned out to be a lady who couldn't remember where she lived, and the sticker where the kid said to put the money in the bag but forgot which bag and ended up leaving his monogrammed knapsack at the bank. I was raking in so much dough that my piggy bank felt almost half full. And I had a weird case of a feud over a Snickers bar to thank for it. Reading over those cases now felt just like reading the funny pages. They say pride goes before a fall, but this felt less like a fall and more like a funfair coaster out of control down a hill, with no refunds afterwards. I was now so broke I even had to switch from suckers to chewing licorice, and it was not doing the trick. My day of reckoning had arrived when I got a call about a tip on some suspicious activity near a cotton candy packing plant. Apparently, somebody was planning a heist on all the major candy suppliers. I still remember that fateful day. The oddly familiar voice, the abrupt end of the call that made me question whether I was being had by a suspect or if I just forgot to pay my electric again. On the long walk down to the pier to find the place looted, and only one piece of evidence on the scene. A very familiar-looking coat. Frank's. Well, technically it was still mine, but it had been impounded for evidence after Frank's arrest. So I marched down to the police station to deliver the results of my investigation and see if they'd let my coat go for a nickel. But when I arrived, I received a nasty shock. Frank had been working at the time of the crime, at the station, as their own coat hanger. Feeling baffled, not to mention too-timed, I realized I had reached a dead end. There was no way I could solve this case. The papers knew it. The world knew it. I was done. After weeks of brooding over these papers, I finally realized I'd have to shut out my window, at least for a while. If there's one thing you can always count on, there's always bills to pay. And if this business wasn't going to pick up again, then maybe the private eye needed to stay shut. I needed a change of scenery. Something that would make use of my skills and get me out of the limelight for a while. Now, what kind of job would require lurking in dark alleys and wearing a wide-brimmed fedora? Whatever the answer was, I figured I'd find it at the bottom of a tall glass of cream and sugar. And so I left my life behind me to go knocking on the door of destiny. Or at least the door of the old Milkshake Club lounge. New Schwirtzy, the lively little city that always kicks into full gear as the sun slips away. All the action went down at the hottest spot in town, the Milkshake Club Lounge, and there I was, the bouncer in the entry, counting or knocking heads of unsavory patrons when who should come running but Frank Schwirtzy. I posited from my keen powers of observation that Frank seemed a bit distressed. It was when he mentioned his previous ties to the candy mob and a new lead on not just the cold cases, but a whole string of hits on other suppliers going down that very night, that I really perked my ears up. My last case wasn't a dead end after all, and this was a chance to make it right. Now, Frank had always been the kind of guy you needed to watch your back around. One minute you're playing miniature pool, and the next he's mysteriously sunk everything in one turn. He was the type to swipe your milkshake the second your back was turned, but the joke was on him since I would always spike my milkshake with some sour citric acid first as a precaution against the free refill switch. Unfortunately for me though, he always ordered banana and coconut, my least favorite flavor. Between the underhandedness and bad taste, I didn't trust intel from him in the slightest. But he was insistent that he was waiting on a Veronica to meet him with a tip on the next hit, so hoping this wasn't a bizarre blind date setup, I ordered another round of my work tab and settled in for a long evening. I was really having second thoughts about working with Frank again by this point. On top of him having nowhere near enough investigation experience, this job demanded a certain level of grace under pressure. But he insisted that with his previous in with the mob, he would have a better chance of getting to the juicy info first. So I decided to set some ground rules. First, he'd drive us in his car, seeing as I had neither a car nor a license nor a desire to hear his critiques on my driving. And second, I wanted my coat back by the end of the investigation. Although I couldn't deny it suited him fairly well. It's a mark of the trade, and I wasn't about to compete with him of all people for my title. Then Frank came me with the big news. The Snickers theft had been the last for his stockpile to buy out of the syndicate, but getting caught and stuck behind bars for its send a message. I was so shocked I almost fell out of my chair before I really fell out when shoved aside by none other than the elusive dame herself. Before I could compose myself, she had slipped a mysterious paper to Frank and gone to fetch her milkshake from the server. The way she looked right through me made me wonder if all that I'd done for her in the past meant anything to her at all. But it was soon clear that the favor had been returned. The intercepted telegram pointed us to an alleyway downtown with a secret entrance to a sugar storeroom. Something that seemed to fit the mojo for criminals. This first hit would take place in about an hour, so we had to hurry if we wanted to make it early enough to stake things out. Of course, a little extra energy and potassium for the road couldn't hurt. One last sip and we were off. And of course I couldn't let Frank's cheating go unanswered on the billiards. I had a reputation to keep up. After all, there's always somebody watching. We found the alleyway just as described in the telegram, but the secret door was a little less clear. There were no indicators of any kind of life, just some leaning telephone poles and a few windows cracked open to let in some air. Seemed a bit of a waste. Personally, I would have just opened them. We went from one wall to another, poking around and testing to see where the candy cellar might be, but no dice. It seemed as though this hidden door wanted to stay hidden. The time given on the message came and went, and still no one showed, and we couldn't find any entrance. I was beginning to wonder why Frank hadn't been privy to any information on its whereabouts, or who any of the other leaders were for that matter. But he said the boss had kept all the other agents in the ring secret to each other for insurance. I wondered if that would fall under liability, but what did I know? I didn't even own a car. Eventually I began to face the reality that we had hit a dead end. Maybe it was a bad lead, or maybe they'd caught wind of the leak, or maybe there just wasn't any through traffic on this road. Whatever the case, I wouldn't be able to switch back to suckers anytime soon. But just then, I found something that hit me like the biggest sucker punch I'd ever felt. Because it was. I came to in a smoky, drafty old room, cuffed to a trash can with Frank. I shook Frank awake, and we struggled to free ourselves as much as we could, but we only succeeded in cutting off the circulation to our wrists. While my hands were falling asleep and I waited for them to wake back up, the smell of somebody's week-old tuna lunch hit me, along with a slew of other pieces of garbage past, and one more pressing scent. Smoke. Someone had left behind a sparkling sucker as a present. Flavor? Cherry. Quickly I devised a plan to neutralize the cherry bomb, shield us both with the bottom of the trash can. As we started scooting closer and closer, I realized too late that gravity was taking hold. As the smell of burning trash and a hint of old boot filled the room, I discovered something lying in the corner, a Snickers package, individually wrapped fun-sized bars. Someone with a sweet tooth had been here after all, and they had company. As I reached to holster my gun, I remembered that I had no holster. All the better to keep me ready for a quick draw for any situation. As we rounded the corner outside the lair, we saw a suspicious-looking truck speed away down the road. We sprinted after it, and after accidentally flipping all the knobs in the rush and giving Frank's windshield a good wipe, followed at a safe distance for several miles before reaching their destination. An old, near-abandoned warehouse by the market district, the secret candy reserves. As we snuck around the back entrance, we heard some scuffling from inside the building and then a suspicious-sounding explosion. At first I thought it was the old raccoon in the fuse box debacle again, but one look in the window told a different story. A smoky haze suggested our culprits had used some of their signature cherry bombs on the vault door mechanisms. But the good news was, at least we wouldn't have to replace any more fuse boxes. Sure enough, there they were, scrambling to gather the last of the goods, and as I heard the clicking of machine guns in the distance, I whipped out my trusty piece to give him a taste. He could be a real smooth talker in a pinch, but he never heard of using his inside voice. So soon he and the goons' return fire were creating a disturbance that was sure to have the neighborhood searching the skies for the fireworks. Unfortunately for all of us, nobody would be seeing anything. The thick clouds of smoke kept us from seeing our targets, so for a solid minute we were all shooting into the haze with no way to know whether we were making contact or not. In fact, it seemed nobody actually hit anyone, but the details, like the room, were a bit hazy. As the goons ceased fire and some more hurried scuffling was heard, I realized they were making their escape, and thinking quickly, I hurled Frank towards the door to pursue. As we ran around the corner to start the car, I couldn't help but wish I had kept up with that exercise program. Then again, running almost entirely on sugar and a brooding demeanor for years probably hadn't helped. As we raced on the road after the goons, I began to wonder where in the world they had come from. Where do you find guys that all wear leather, carry a hefty piece, and look almost identical? Was this a mob-type family or a quadruplets-type family thing? Then again, they did seem to be pretty professional, but little did they know they were dealing with the most slippery detectives since the police chief's floor-cleaning incident. As Frank swerved around the corner, we caught the truck in our sights once again, and the chase was on. Finally, I was getting the chance to try something I'd always wanted to do. I leaned out the window and let off a few shots on the truck, like a real-life car chase. Frank was flinging the steering wheel around so much I thought it was going to come clean off. Then in the back of the trailer, I saw the silhouette of a familiar face, and suddenly I realized that Snickers package we had found in the warehouse. It had never even been opened. But I remembered a certain fun-size wrapper in Frank Schwirtzy's own garbage can 2 years before. When I had found Frank's coat at the cotton candy plant, I seemed to remember someone walking by around that time, looking back with a familiar swish of her hair. When the dame gave Frank the tip, she seemed to be in a serious mood about something. From my sharp concentration, I had deduced that they had some sort of history, like he had upset her in some way. The dame must have been trying to beat us to the punch and track down the culprit's trailer to ambush them at their destination. I was so confused and excited about my deductions that I almost missed the giant machine gun the dame had pulled on me. Scratch that theory, this one sure was a stumper. While I was loading my last bullet, turns out those hunks of metal cost a fortune. Frank was swerving around town and avoiding all the various potholes the city refused to fix while somehow trying to stay out of the speed limit to keep in the chief's good graces. The bridge to Manhattan was just a few miles away, and the truck was getting closer to it around every corner. I finally convinced Frank that official investigators had no time for speed limits, and one wheelie later we were gaining on him more and more. But it became clear that Frank's driving abilities were less refined the faster he drove, or at least that's what ran through my head as he was bashed against just about everything except the headrest. As the truck raced towards its arched escape route, I knew what I had to do. With only one bullet left, I aimed as best I could for the right side mirror. With that out of commission, they'd have to pull over due to unsafe driving conditions with a large blind spot. Unfortunately, I accidentally hit the front right wheel instead, and the tire freed itself from the axle's grasp. Of course, that had been my second choice. I just hadn't wanted to pull such a dangerous stunt unless absolutely necessary. But suddenly the truck began to swerve out of control in front of us and smashed into the side of the bridge, before tumbling over the edge and careening into the watery depths of the Hampson River. As Frank and I watched the water settle, we didn't see any sign of the dame. I guess with that much candy, sooner or later, she was bound to crash. Another day, another bill to pay. Only this time, my landlord was going to be getting everything right on time. As I opened the door to my apartment, I found everything exactly as I'd left it. The dusty haze, the desk with no decorations, and my illustrious mattress of illustrated funny pages. It seemed like just yesterday when I left it all behind. Actually, it was more like early this morning when I'd gone to visit the chief. The papers of the day had confirmed that our dame on the lam had been caught and indicted as one of the candy crime ring leaders. I had gotten a call that morning that the police had found her floating downstream in Manhattan, clinging to empty cotton candy bags like she'd watched her entire life's work dissolve through her fingers. It seemed they'd be taking her to court next week, and they wanted me and Frank to be there as witnesses. But until then, they wanted me to start work immediately, on retainer as their official private investigator. The official police PI could probably afford a few knickknacks on his desk, no? At the end of the day, though, it wasn't so much about the 10-cent paycheck. as it was being able to swing a new bunch of suckers.
Did I leave my fan on the whole time?